That's why I'm with.
And I can direct them that we have on the same page. It's something that's desirable. It doesn't really attract it.
All right, I got 7 o'clock. We'll call this meeting to order. You stand. Judge, would you lead us in prayer? Please remain standing for the pledge.
You'll bow your heads. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for the opportunity to serve you and to serve those people that we represent. We just pray that you would guide us and help us to make decisions that are in the best interest of the people of Thomaston. Guide our meeting and lead us as we go through these issues. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First item is the approval of the minutes for the January 18th regular meeting. I'm seeing those. The only thing I saw was, I think he had my name, was calling it to order, and I think Doug called it because I came in. It says I come in late. Yeah, I came in late,
that.
so
Thank you, Mayor.
I just happened to see that. Surprised I caught it.
Me too.
Is there any other additions, corrections? Not. Is there a motion to approve as amended?
So order.
Second. Second. Any discussion? Hearing none, call for a vote.
Councilmember Graham?
Aye.
Councilmember Middlebrooks?
Yes.
Councilmember Tucker?
Yes.
Councilmember Reeves?
Yes.
Councilmember Head?
Yes.
All right. Next is the adoption of the agenda. Do we have any move around? Adds?
If it pleases the council, I'd ask that item 2 and 3 be stricken or tabled, and 4 additions I have is item 10 or 11. 10 being an engagement agreement with drivers and Adams for the joint projects audit, and item 11 being an intergovernmental agreement between City of Thomaston and Upson County for IT services.
All right, you've heard that. Do I hear a motion to?
So order.
Second.
Okay, second. Any discussion? Hearing none, call for a vote.
Councilmember Graham?
Aye.
Councilmember Middlebrooks?
Yes.
Councilmember Tucker?
Yes.
Councilmember Reeves?
Yes.
Councilmember Head?
Yes.
All right. Next item is the recognition of Black History Month. I signed a proclamation today, being February is noted as Black History Month in the United States and all, so we wanted to do that, something to proclaim it here in the city. You'd like me to read this? I'll read it if you want me to. If I can read. This is whereas during Black History Month, our community celebrates the many accomplishments and contributions made by African Americans to our economic, cultural, spiritual, and political development. And whereas in 1915, Dr. Carter Godwin Woodson, a noted black scholar and son of a former slaves, founded the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. And whereas Dr. Woodson initiated Black History Week, February 12th, 1926. For many years, the second week of February, chosen to coincide with the birthdays of Frederick Douglass and President Abraham Lincoln, was celebrated by African Americans in the United States. Whereas in 1976, as part of the nation's bicentennial, Black History Week was expanded and became established as Black History Month and is now celebrated all over North America. And whereas after the Civil War, many Black Americans sought a better life, free from oppression, and in search of new economic opportunities and the liberty to create their own lives. And whereas many African American settlers homesteaded and worked in industries like Transcontinental Railroad, these Americans played an important role in settling this country. Whereas the observance of Black History Month calls our city's attention to the continued need to battle racism and pride and to build a society that continues our efforts to create a world that is more just, peaceful, and prosperous for all. Now, therefore, I, Mayor J.D. Stiles, do hereby proclaim February 2022 as Black History Month in appreciation to the city of Thomaston's Afro-American community and those across this nation in its history. My witness, therefore, have hereto set my hand first day of February 2022. We'll have this up on the website or social media for everybody else to read and see that. That's that, and then who else? Oh yeah, I think we got something today. Civic Center, y'all.
Yeah, we're having that Black History program on, I don't know the exact date, but it's on Sunday.
Sunday, February 27th, right here it says.
Okay.
It's our doors open to the public at 5:30. Program starts at 6, and you'll see that it's on Civic Center's Facebook page. Guest speakers, Reverend James McGill, performances by volunteer by Youth Alive. So a good program this at the end of the month, kind of to wrap up the month. So, and then also just be on aware that our next council meeting is something special we're going to do, and kind of keep it a little secret right now. But of course, y'all can ask me about it, and I'll tell you about what we're doing on that second meeting on the 15th. So that is that. Now we'll enter our public hearing number 2 regarding the new sign, zoning ordinances, policies and procedures for conducting public hearings, and standards governing the exercise of zoning power. Russell?
Turn it over to Mr. Bill Johnson. Welcome.
Thank you. Honorable Commission, council members rather, good evening. We have been working on the sign ordinance and the zoning ordinance for quite some time. The sign ordinance had to be revised because we revised the number of districts in the zoning ordinance. And since sign regulations are based on the zoning district, when those districts changed, we had to change the sign ordinance. The sign ordinance has, we've added tables to the sign ordinance that go by zoning districts so that you can look very quickly at the table and just discover what the new sign regulations are by zoning district. We've had a focus on billboards. We've lowered the size, maximum size of a billboard to 300 square feet. Now it is 672 square feet, which is the standard, but that standard applies to interstate locations, and we are not on the interstate, so sort of trying to take advantage of that to keep those signs down to a minimum size. The sign ordinance, generally, we've tried to get fewer, shorter, and smaller size signs, realizing that we have a lot of signs on the ground, obviously, and we don't want to create a huge volume of non-conforming uses as to signs. So that's part of our guidance going into rewriting the sign ordinance. For example, the downtown is limited to a monument-style sign with a maximum height of 8 feet, which is considering the travel speeds, which are probably around 20 miles an hour around the square. That's entirely, in our opinion, that's an entirely adequate sign height. not a need for pole signs that we see out on the commercial corridor, where we find much greater sign heights, and the height would be a maximum of 35 feet. The sign ordinance is, we think, business friendly, it's reasonable, and we want to be able to defend that change in the sign ordinance so that we're not faced with a lot of challenges through the ordinance. Are there any questions on the sign ordinance itself?
You want to talk about stake signs real quick?
Sure.
What we,
Stake signs, we've kind of, we've spent a lot of time on stake signs. As it stands, the recommendation is for one stake sign for non-residential properties, one stake sign per 100 feet of frontage. So if you're on the corner lot, for example, you could have 2 stake signs. On residential properties, that's where it gets a little tricky because of political signs. And we are told pretty much because of the constitutionality involved that we really cannot regulate political signs. And because we want to steer away from regulating content, we don't even call them political signs. They're stake signs, and the message may be political, it may be commercial, it may be non-commercial. But despite that, all of those various avenues have to be equal. I think the latest we have is that stake signs will be limited to 3 stake signs, and these are the 2-foot by 3-foot stake sign area, and that will be at any time of the year. We initially thought we would use the election period, but that identifies it as a political sign, and you have to read a sign to discover, is it compliant with the ordinance? You can't, because it's regulating content. So I think where we left it the other night was 3 signs per property at any time of the year. And that would give the opportunity for a contractor or for sale sign or just a hello neighbor sign.
you want to talk about commercial? Did you broach that? How many on commercial?
Yeah, 1 per 100.
1 per 100.
Yeah. And industrial, we don't really accommodate industrial because they're not really, they have signs, of course, pole signs, monument signs, but they're not in the business of trying to attract customers to an industrial property. And signs, how we can leverage what goes on with signs to a greater degree is that by their very nature, they're intended to attract attention. And that can be jeopardize motorists or pedestrians when they're distracted by signs. We spent a lot of ink on the regulation of electronic signs, because that's where we're going to with that. So there's, for billboards, for example, there's static signs, there's the mechanical signs, which you don't see too much anymore. In the old days, you had those tri-fold signs. Then there's the signs that look like a big telephone screen. And the ordinance accounts for regulation of all of those. There's a requirement for the sign to the lighting of the sign to reflect the ambient light. It can't be more than 0.03 foot candles greater than ambient light. So there's an automatic default if the screen goes into a non-functioning position, then someone's to be available within 24 hours to correct that sign. In terms of non-conforming signs, if the sign owner is notified that the sign does not comply with the ordinance during the appeals process, if they choose to appeal the decision of the building official, they would have to cover the sign with some sort of material. Any other topics?
Not on signs, Bill. I'm good.
Okay. So on the zoning
Can I
ordinance.
ask you one question?
Sure.
There's a thing called feather feathered sign.
Yeah, those are the ones that's kind of stuck in the ground. We went from 8 prohibited signs to I think 39 prohibited signs, that being one of them.
Yeah, is that the one with the sort of comes off as a flag?
Mhm.
And there's a number of those
Right.
right now.
Yeah, they're very popular. They're cheap.
And so they're prohibited under the new ordinance.
It'd be an animated sign. And the people out there with spinners, we call them.
I think technically if they're not permitted now, they're illegal.
So the ones that are in place now are,
No, they're not.
What about in the case of a new business? Isn't there a permit that you can have for
We
so many,
have
60 days
We
or
have
something?
traditionally allowed like grand opening signs or welcome signs through a comp permit for like 30 days during a grand opening.
Would any of those signs be permitted during that said time under that special permit?
I would prefer not, but it's up to y'all.
I guess maybe the easier question, there's 30 some odd prohibited, it's easier to ask which ones are legal.
Everything, well,
I mean,
there's more legal than not. I would-
so there's more than 30, what did you say, 38 legal signs that you can have?
Prohibited.
No, prohibited.
Right, but how many signs are legal? I mean, along those same kind of lines, I mean, if somebody had a grand opening and we didn't allow those, what would they have that they would use?
Stake signs, board signs, pole signs, window signs.
That were of temporary nature?
Or you could allow them for a temporary basis, right? It's just,
I mean, I have to admit, they do kind of grab your attention. And probably in an unsafe manner when you're driving the car.
They're usually put in the right
We-
way.
Yeah.
we can regulate, more or less depending on, the political will of whatever you want to do.
I mean, if it was strictly enforced as far as the temporary nature, I mean, I think we ought to go back and kind of look at,
So-
in that temporary as a grand opening and then kind of revert back. But again, I don't want to create a headache for our.
So administratively, what we have done is with the onset of COVID and the closure of commercial and retail businesses on the onset, and as those businesses started the progression of reopening, where there were maybe curbside only or delivery only or yes, we're open. Administratively, we got lax on the regulation of signs to try to be business friendly and considerate of the pandemic. But that is rocked on now for probably 2 years. And what I have told the police department and code enforcement is to start issuing notices of violation of any signs that you have on your property that are not permitted. And we'll give them a reasonable amount of time to have those signs removed, and then we'll start the enforcement. So I'm not trying to write anybody's tickets, but my intent was to go from lax do it during COVID protocol to at least some semblance of total compliance prior to the enactment of a new sign ordinance, so there's no perceived nature of there being a grandfather situation.
Right.
Where you have some signs that are probably non-conforming now, we just want a process of trying to address that prior to the adoption.
What about banners?
Streamers, banners, and I think some of it's due to logistics. One of the things that we tried to preserve was, especially within our core in the historic district, to keep those signs cohesive.
Okay.
We'll do whatever you want.
I was just curious. Because, as we hopefully continue to grow our downtown, people are going to look for options in order to promote their new businesses and things, and just want to make sure it's clear and what they can and can't do.
If you want them temporary,
No, I'm not saying it sounds like y'all put a lot of thought to this, and I haven't particularly had any comments or concerns regarding the permissibility of them. Just curious.
But you did say grand opening signs are not permitted.
yes, they are permitted.
They
But
are.
style is what the type of signs.
So what is the aesthetic look you're going for, right? What is the vision of the aesthetic? Because you can have a sign, signs are meant to market, right? They're meant to grab your attention, to draw you in, so you have to balance what aesthetic quality you want versus what leniency you're willing to grant commercial and retail entities to grab that attention.
And Russell, all I would say is that might be one little thing out of all this, and there's been a ton of work, but that might be one little thing as to whether to, certain of these signs, which may be popular today, for a grand opening, and as Ryan said, maybe for 30 days, because I would agree, we ought to want less in number, less intrusive. But I do know if somebody has a brand new business, maybe we ought to give them 30 days to use certain types of sign, and then say, okay, at the end of 30 days, it's time to take that.
That wouldn't be commonly permissible under the current, after that 30 days. And I don't know what that is, and I don't know if we want to hash it out now, but just something that before we approve all this, and you said, is it March that we're going to approve the zoning ordinance and stuff?
So we're talking about the intent of the law versus the spirit of the law.
I mean, I totally get what it needs to be conformity across, particularly in downtown when you're trying to maintain a certain look and things of your downtown. Yeah, but again, but I don't want to create an administrative nightmare either for those who are going to be enforcing this. We opened it up. I mean, I probably already know the answer to this question, but I mean, for 30 days, depending on the number of new businesses, I guess I can get pretty hectic trying to regulate and keep up. Okay, this started on the 1st, and this is.
We can keep up with it, and if it's 32 days or 40 days, as long as it's not there in perpetuity.
Right.
And just by the very nature of a sign is to get your attention. And I think if somebody has the courage and the desire to open a new business in our town, don't we want them to be able to say, hey, I'm new, maybe take a look. And but let's be reasonable in how they do it, and give them a chance to, hey, give a shout. But I think the direction we're going with this is absolutely the way we want to go.
Mr. Mayor, if I could just mention the sign types that are allowed in the downtown. That would be A-frame signs, the sandwich board signs that go out on the sidewalk. There's restrictions on that would be within a certain distance of the building. There's window signs, there's wall signs, there's monument signs. It's quite a palette of signs, and there are not many other options really. And we're fine with the temporary signs, whatever sign type you'd like to allow in addition to the signs I just mentioned. No roof signs, but there's no roof signs allowed in any district as written.
Nothing says come and look at my business and those characters that pop around and out of the.
It's on the prohibited list.
Yeah. I would assume so. But like Doug said, they certainly somebody who's gone out on a limb and opened up a new business to have something extra for some short amount of time to say I'm here, and we all can agree that it's meant to market and grab your attention. I don't know if it's something to think about.
So, still got to be off right away, right?
Yes.
Still should probably be permitted. But for grand opening signs, we can comp that, right, as an inducement for business. I don't have a problem with that. So anything specifically listed as prohibited, provided that it's not affixed to a city asset or on right of way, then can be permissible within the first 30 days of grand opening. How about that? It can't interfere with traffic signalization.
Oh, sure, yeah, of
That's-
course. If it's a safety issue, that obviously that's.
There's actually a section in the draft that tracks the sections that are in the existing ordinance, that is signs that don't need to be permitted and don't fall under the regulations of the ordinance, and those are signs that are interior to a building, so they're not meant for public viewing. And then there are signs that they have to comply with the ordinance. You don't necessarily have to pull a permit. But there's a very limited list. It's not any different than what's in there now in the existing ordinance.
Zoning?
Onto the zoning ordinance. That's the bigger nut to crack. As it turns out, I don't know if everyone's aware of it or not, but there's only one true single-family detached residential district in the existing ordinance. As soon as you go from R1 to R2, R2 allows virtually every housing type. So in working through the city code, we found that the subdivision regulations provide for a state subdivision Class 1 and Class 2. Class 2 being 1 acre and Class 1 being 2 acre minimum lot size. Minimum lot size in the R1 is 15,000 square feet and R2 is 9,000 square feet. So what we're proposing is 4 single-family detached dwelling types in zoning districts. We anticipate that the ES, it's called here on the zoning map, the state subdivision will be out, not in town, because of the platting of land in the core area is much smaller. Speaking of that, we have a provision that allows existing single-family lots and dwellings to not be termed non-conforming uses, because we don't, certainly with our residents in town, we don't want to create a lot of non-conformance, so that, for example, there's a calamity and someone has to rebuild, we don't want them to have to rebuild to a larger floor area, because first of all, insurance won't cover it, and secondly, it'll be potentially out of scale with surrounding development. The other biggest news about the draft zoning ordinance is that it is exclusive in nature. The existing ordinance and many ordinances are cumulative. If you have a use that's permitted in the less intense district, then it's permitted in the next district up, say from residential to commercial and then to industrial. And the industrial district may say all of the permitted uses in the prior district. But in terms of land use and guiding land use and trying to follow your character area's future land use map, it's very difficult if any use can be in a particular area. That makes it very hard to control. And also, you don't want your commercial property and your industrial property vying for buying land. I mean, usually commercial can pay a little more for land than industrial. There's some exceptions. But you don't want to squeeze where you've decided we'd like to have industrial. We don't want a lot of non-industrial uses in there in terms of additional traffic, because then you've got conflict with tractor trailers and passenger vehicles. But primarily the price of land. They're competing with commercial uses. So this won't eliminate that competition because a lot of the city's already developed, but it will address it for future considerations. There are a number of new uses that have popped up. I was looking in the NAICS code recently, and some of the uses that you hear about. Let me just read the list here: live workspaces, adult daycare, short-term rentals, pet daycare, non-alcoholic beverage bars, climate-controlled storage facilities, maker spaces, co-working space, microbreweries, hookah bars and vape shops, food trucks. Those are terms that have popped up in the past maybe 5-10 years. So the ordinance addresses all of those, defines them, and regulates them through provisions in the ordinance. The ordinance also focuses on uses like pawn shops, liquor stores, rooming and boarding houses, halfway houses, small box discount stores, and even convenience stores. We have a limit based on ratio of population to the number of stores. in the market analysis that we talked about with the zoning commission, was very helpful in being able to devise a factual basis, because zoning has to have some factual basis, some support. A statement of purpose has been greatly expanded in the new draft zoning ordinance to give the city attorney ammunition when it comes time to fend off a challenge. So those uses have potentially adverse impacts on surrounding uses, and that's why we've sort of singled them out, and they are regulated. For example, there, I think it was 21 convenience stores at the moment, based on the market analysis, which evaluated supply and demand. We're able to reduce that number as a reasonable number of 8. So if we get a new application for a 9th one, we already have 8 on the ground, we will not accept, under the ordinance, we will not accept the 9th application. In terms of transferring, if someone has a business that falls in one of these non-conforming businesses and they want to pass it on to their heirs, there is a provision for that in the ordinance. I guess the most attractive thing about the ordinance, based on comments from the zoning commission, was the uses table. So it's got across the top all of the zoning districts, and then across the first column is all of the possible uses that could crop up. And there's some administrative discretion in the draft ordinance. The city manager will be able to look at an application that comes in if it's not handled by the occupational tax permit clerk, not you, but someone in that office over there. If they can't make a decision on whether this use is similar to a listed use that is permitted, because unless you get that manual, almost 1,000 pages, which we are going to reference that, it's hard to have an ordinance that has every possible use. You get a new use that comes to you, it's not listed. The draft ordinance allows the city manager to evaluate that based on criteria that are stated in the ordinance. He can make a decision as to whether it's similarly an impact to a permitted use. So that's new in the ordinance. And another thing that's new is that most zoning ordinances are over parked. They have way too many parking spaces, but parking ratios are basically for that peak shopping period that starts around Thanksgiving. We have minimum and maximum number of parking spaces, so that we can, if a business so chooses, they can reduce their parking to the minimum required. Also, the provision in the draft ordinance that allows the property owner to come to the city with an inventory that they performed. It's got to be an inventory that's verifiable by the building official. And if convinced that the actual pattern of parking based on observation is lower than the parking ratio that would normally be assigned to that particular zoning district, then for that property and that property alone, the parking ratio could be reduced. So those are just strategies to be a little more business friendly, to reduce impervious surface area. Excuse me. And yeah, be a little more business friendly. I think those are the major changes in the zoning ordinance. Unless you've got something.
Yeah, so a couple of questions that have been asked of me, one's for council and a couple are for Bill. The first of which is the minimum square footage requirement for the build out in a traditional R1 zone. So your lot's going to be 15,000 square foot, and the minimum requirement is 1,000 square foot house. And the question posed to me is that not too small of a footprint for R1 traditional, and maybe reserve smaller houses for R2, but your traditional single family, would there be consideration for increasing that minimum to call it 1,500 square foot? So that's one question that has been posed. The other question, Bill, is churches, parochial institutions their allowability in multiple zones where they're included, and should they assume their previous zone, whether it be R1 or commercial or industrial, instead of being reclassified to professional, institutional, that if churches are allowable in multiple zoning districts, instead of recreating that as a PI zone, if they are in a residential neighborhood, would it make more sense to keep them zoned residential to keep that cohesion as a land unit? So that was a question. The other question was regarding PI, professional institutional zoning, and the perceived requirement of having certain type of uses permitted at all, whether they be halfway house or whether they be clinic or drug rehabilitation centers. My understanding was that you could not preclude that. Some of that was tied to federal housing and federal law that you had to have an allowance. So could you maybe start there and speak on that one with the PI designation for halfway house or clinic, and kind of the intent of pushing that on the medical corridor?
Yeah, the thinking on that was that the services that those individuals may need would be convenient in a PI district. I don't know that the city's under an obligation to accommodate halfway houses or homeless shelters. I'm not sure about that. What I'm sure about is that personal care homes, also known as group homes, need to be a permitted use in all of the residential districts, just as a traditional household may come to the city for, well, they wouldn't come for CO, but the builder would come for COs for the buildings. There wouldn't be any extra hoops for that applicant to jump through. And that does reflect the Fair Housing Act. ADA, I suppose, is in there as well. And it may be in there for halfway houses or homeless shelters, but I'm not aware of that.
So then the question would be, if it's not admittedly required to be permissible, is there political will to provide an exclusion for that particular permitted use?
I will say that they're by ratio, and now, as drafted, they're subject to the ratio. So we won't be like 10 of them under the new ordinance.
I guess it'd be nice to know if they're legally, if you have to include them in, speaking of the ones that you're unsure of, those are legally binding, included in every residential.
The way I always thought was that without a statistical basis for the exclusion, you had to permit it. You could regulate it, but you had to permit it unless you had a factual basis to prohibit it.
Well, it's accommodated in the draft. Right now, it's relegated to the industrial district.
And that was P&I, the professional institutional, I think, in the proposed zoning.
For what use?
I guess we're still speaking of halfway houses and what was the homeless shelters?
Yes.
I think they're under PI, not industrial.
They are, yeah.
So I guess, would that be, if you're gonna have, and again, that's what kind of created the question from constituents, is, do you want that close to church and everything else? Obviously R1 is it's probably under our existing system, the most restrictive, and I would assume the most restrictive under the new proposed zoning. But to Russell's point, do you just leave it under its current zoning, because they're all kind of spread out depending on where they are, and then we're trying to kind of put them all in one? I mean, I understand the basis for wanting to do that, but just didn't know what the options would be on that, getting Russell's opinion, and obviously yours.
Let's talk about those specific uses and figure out the strategy.
In the PI?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or whether or not we want to move them.
Yeah,
Um,
historically, I mean, churches have been in the downtown and they've been in the neighborhoods, just like schools.
But you can
Anyway,
arguably be R1
Right, yeah.
under that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, the only thing I can say about places of worship, that everywhere a place of assembly, like a theater, is allowed, or a lodge, club, a place of worship has to be allowed because it's a federal law.
Oh, yeah, I'm not disputing that. I mean, I think we,
No, I just want to point it out.
yeah.
Just what if a church closed down? You know, would you, if it was a church in a neighborhood,
Well, then you
and it
would,
closed down, if
depending on what's
it
around it.
was R1, then it must be,
So the
Right.
thought would be to
Continued.
take those religious institutions and make the zoning cohesive with the district they're
Yes.
in. So instead of zoning it PI in the middle of a residential neighborhood, it would be R1.
Yeah, that's how it's drafted. I mean, in the uses table, there's a lot of Ps by places of worship. So all of the ES1, 2, R1, R2.
Yeah, but outside of the table, though, I think it's all lumped into PI.
There's a couple, and I can get with you on the map. So what about the square footage requirement for minimum square footage requirement in single family? Are we okay with 1,000, or is there a preference to increase that?
R1's 1,000, R2 is 800.
Yeah.
We're just talking about lot size, right?
No, you're talking about the actual size of the structure.
It's 15,000 and 9,000 all the lot size.
Okay.
You're feeling, Russell, that 1,000 may be too small?
For R1.
Mhm.
It's pretty small, that's for sure.
1,500 sounds reasonable.
I would say 1,500 with a caveat that we work in some discretion if we render a lot imbuildable due to that, right? If you can't meet the setbacks due to the addition.
Yeah. Well, then a variance would be probably appropriate. Let me just point out, there's a lot of small pieces in the ordinance, but they're not small in their impact, especially if it's your property. So as drafted, you could, the limit on the new house is 150% of the floor area of dwellings on, next two dwellings on each side and even across the street. That's a database issue. You have to have that data to be able to enforce it, but that's it, it's written in the ordinance, and that's to control scale. So you don't have someone coming in and buying, I mean, this happens in aggressive housing markets. They'll buy 1 or 2 lots, 3 lots maybe, combine the lots and put a McMansion, they used to call them. Without that 150%, then that's the danger. And that would apply, you know, for new, like, that's primarily for infill and scattered sites, and not for new subdivisions.
So we could go 1,500, 800.
Because your subdivisions are gonna have covenants in and of themselves, right, on minimum square footage? I mean, obviously, unless they, assuming they don't conflict with your zoning, wherever the subdivision is located,
Yeah, I think the market's probably closer to 1,500 than it is to 800.
particularly new construction.
Yeah.
That would be my recommendation. The next question has to do with additive zoning and the proximity of our current light industrial district to our downtown and our commercial hub. Because the new zoning is not additive, then those light industrial properties with close proximity to downtown would be relegated to only that light industrial use. Would there be consideration for those properties zoned M2 to pick up some of the traditional C1 or C2 uses, provided that they come via special use permit instead of just exclusively permitted? So we have a lot of, so it goes downtown, and then the rail spur kind of comes right through there, and then you have all of that M2 zoning, which could be commercial, could be M2. So I'm thinking due to its proximity to the downtown that we allow some of those C2 uses in the M2 zone via special permit.
Because couldn't you have some of those properties, say like on Hightower Street, are probably zoned
Industrial. And that would, and currently with the way the zoning is done, it would be prohibited without a rezone, so I think you can still protect it via the special use permit, but given the close proximity to your downtown core and proximity to your general commercial, you could make those allowance via special permit.
Would it kind of open up to somebody's ability to want to come in and kind of just, create more of a commercial type setting, environment, business
Yes.
there?
And I think it would almost be understood that if you're looking at light industrial property close to a downtown, that your land use may be more driven to that commercial aspect, but you still have some latitude for light industrial due to the old rail district. So I'll get with you on those, Bill. The other question that I've gotten is from the general public, just via email, and that has to do with the exclusion of governmental properties essentially being exempt from zoning. So my thought on that prospect was that if you are the city government and we buy land and it has a particular zoning, by the definition of the governing authority, we wouldn't take an action that is counter to the interest of the public because we are the representatives of the public, therefore you're exempt from the zoning. Furthermore, if you were to zone a piece of public property, you cannot bind your successors in office. They can immediately undo it. So I can write out the exemption provision, but legally you're exempt anyway because you can change it at any point in time. So I don't know if that's a communication issue with the general public, but there was some concern about the preservation of historic places or, old home sites that the city could come into possession of, but unlike traditional means of commerce or residential property, if I have to build a lift station, that's not going to be permitted in, but if the city's got to put in a lift station, the city's got to put in a lift station. That's kind of one of the reasons where, if I got to put in a transmission line or dig a well, is for the common good, and that's some of the reason that the city was written out, or other entities, state of Georgia or the county government would be exempt from the zoning provision. I don't know how you could write in a zoning provision for the local government. It could bind successors other than making the general public feel better about the protected status of the land. Did I say that right, Bill?
Yes.
So that was a concern, and we've received some emails about, the city writing itself out, but there's a reason.
Just on stepping back to a subject, we talked about supply and demand and convenience stores. Remind me how many convenience stores, do you know approximately how many we got in the city?
20-something, isn't it? 21?
21. And so what is the number that we want?
8.
Okay, so we want to limit it to 8. We got 21. So let's say somebody owns a business that they put their life into and they want to sell it. Is that, how do you reduce it when they've got financial interest in a building that's pretty much a convenience store for the most part? How does that work?
I draw similar parallels to, let's say the federal government says you can burn coal and you invest in coal plants. And then they say you can't have carbon emissions and you can no longer burn coal.
So they just have to use that space for some other purpose.
We're going to create some non-conforming legal uses, and how those properties progress and transfer over the perpetuity of what we enact is the subject of much legal debate between the attorney and I.
Well,
Shelley?
I definitely think we've got an excess supply of convenience stores.
And I guess to Doug's point, so are we talking, let's say that I've got a convenience store and I pass on and then my heirs don't want it?
No, we wrote them in.
Okay, so it's, if the heirs sell it, and it's, so there's no grandfathering, I guess is the easiest way to ask that.
I'm gonna say no,
Okay.
but maybe.
Okay.
There's some
All right,
non-clarity.
I got you.
We recognize we have an overabundance and a saturation, and this is the first step in addressing that. How
I
we
agree.
get to the end goal is gonna take some conversation.
I want to think that number has really increased in the last 5 years, probably, right?
Mhm.
And those buildings were used for
Other things before that,
other
most of them.
purposes, so we could just say, head back in that direction.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we've got to talk about that a little bit more.
Right.
It's been discussed much.
We disagree.
Well, I think we've, I think we all want it to go in that direction, and we just, how do we do that in a reasonable way?
I'm looking for the section because I was just talking about this recently. And we have to consider the non-conformant article in the draft ordinance. Because if it's passed on with no gap in operation, then it'll be a legal non-conforming use. So we're not going to get to 8 anytime soon.
The
But
most-
some people,
The most likely scenario is January 1st rolls around and they don't renew their occupational tax certificate. Therefore, it becomes a new business, not a renewal.
I found one section here, building permits are not transferable, and special use approvals, as written, are not transferable. But someone, I'm pretty sure, give me more, I'm pretty sure that alcoholic beverages, that ordinance, that if someone moves that license to another building, that's not considered a new license. That's how it's drafted now. So there might be other uses that I'm just not thinking about other than a package store. I don't know if it's on the convenience store or not. Convenience stores, they're on that list of potentially adverse impacts on neighboring properties. So there's a section, I didn't mention it, it's Article 5, it has development standards. There's something like 41 uses there that are subject to these development standards. Convenience stores are in there. There's a wealth of uses that need to be regulated a little more strictly than other uses. So that's what comprises that list. And that's automatic. If someone gets a rezoning, they still are subject to those development standards. There's a couple small things I could mention. Things like consolidation of driveways on a commercial property, so you don't have someone pulling out every 50 feet or 100 feet. The other thing is interparcel access. It's a planner's term. It just means that if you're at one store and you want to go to a store that's maybe a half a mile up the street, you don't have to go up on the 4-lane arterial. You can maneuver on local streets, and they have to have connections. I can recall a time some years back when McDonald's didn't want Burger King's people to be able to come through their property, whether they parked on it or not. So those are just some things to help clean up our commercial corridors. They're little notice, but if it's your property, they'll be big news.
That's all I got.
Anyone else in the public or anything want to say anything before we get a motion?
I just have a question. I'm over here. Just a quick question. Can you point me to the procedure for people who want to be heard but cannot attend? I mean, there was some talk about emails, and for whatever reason, that people can't attend, like I'm a vision impaired person. How is their voice heard in these hearings? Is there a procedure for that?
So they can sign up to speak at a regular meeting, or they can come to the meeting, or they can contact their elected official, I would assume, on their behalf.
Okay, and then it can be read at the meeting if they can't come, their comments?
You know, we talked about that. That's a slippery slope, and whatever the preference of the city council is.
Yeah, I know there's a time limit, 10 minutes, I think, 5 minutes or 10 minutes. It's kind of like being on the Gong Show when you get the hook. But, yeah, I just wanted to kind of clarify that because I have been asked about it.
And I think we're having 4 public hearings.
Yes.
So-
And I thank y'all for that. That's great because lots of people, are just finding out about it, reading about it. And I applaud that. Thank you very much.
So it's Facebook, website, newspaper. It's a lot of places.
We have tried to be transparent about it, and we've downloaded the sign ordinance and the zoning ordinance, and any of the documents that we've referenced are available and accessible on the website. So with this being such a large undertaking, it is hard to go over every little thing, but we've invited the public to review all the maps and the ordinances and address any questions they have by calling City Hall and talking, or coming to one of the 4 meetings that we have.
Right, and I understand that emails, people can kind of be anonymous, except you do have to say, who you are, where you live, and that kind of thing. But yeah, I guess for vision impaired people like me, y'all just be careful when I start driving tonight. But so I guess I can just pick up the phone and call Ryan, right?
You can.
So one more thing, and I think, Deanne, we've sent a notice into the paper. It's going to be 2 more public hearings, and there were 879 parcels that have changed. And there will be a link on the website by address, parcel number. We'll have the map, any impacted, and some of those are general. DT is a new zone. It's the old historic district. Not really a lot of change in use. M2 and M1 are considered change, but they just inverted names, so there's no real change. But for transparency purposes, we're listing all of those parcels, and people will be able to go in and check that and call and ask questions.
And the way that I look at that is that's kind of a reclassification, but not necessarily a change in use. The rezone would be a change in use, and so all of those are listed. So if anybody looks on there and sees their parcel and doesn't understand if it's a change in use or just a reclassification, then they can ask those questions.
Right. Thank you for clarifying that.
And
Thanks.
if you ever have, or anybody in the public ever needs any additional assistance, or we need to change the media somehow to get the information to you guys, if you will let me know in a reasonable amount of time, then I'm happy to, print additional information for you, or sit with you, or read it. We can accommodate
All right.
for any type of disability or anything that someone might need in addition.
Thanks, Oasis.
Mhm.
Appreciate that.
Like I say, I think this has been more transparent than anything's ever been. I mean, just the way YouTube, online, everybody should be able to. Yeah, it takes a little bit on their part to open up their computer, look at it, but to do something. But I mean, it's nothing it's hidden or anything. I mean, it's overabundance almost. But
Bill and I talked about today about the procedures that are in place now versus what's going to be in place if there's an adoption of this ordinance. Do you want to go over that, Bill? I know you've been prepared to do that so that it's obvious how we're set up at this point to do these public hearings.
Okay. Well, there's a law called the Zoning Procedures Law in Georgia. It came out of the Department of Community Affairs. It not only authorizes councils to be able to zone property and control land use, it obligates them to provide public notice for such changes. So we have the zoning procedures law, then we've got the existing ordinance, and then we have the proposed ordinance. And they all kind of track conformance with that zoning procedures law in that you have to advertise in a newspaper of general circulation 15 days, minimum of 15 days, maximum of 45 days before the public hearing in which that item will be considered. Usually a property rezoning is most common. Special use will be an opportunity for applicants to come in and propose a special use on a property. In terms of procedure during the hearing, there's a presiding officer, which would most likely be the mayor, that would announce the item and instruct people as to a sign-in sheet that the city clerk would likely maintain, and he would notify them in his opening remarks about the opportunity for speakers to sign the sign-in sheet and to have opportunity to speak. It's can't be less than 10 minutes. Usually, if there's a group opposing a particular petition, a zoning petition, you may ask that a representative be selected so you don't hear 30 people saying the same thing, to everyone's detriment in a way. Not that we don't want to hear, but if we hear that message and it's the same message, then it should be adequate. The procedures are supposed to be available at the public hearing, which is why we have multiple copies here, so that people understand, they would be able to read the ordinance, because a lot of people don't feel comfortable coming to a public forum and making comments. But if they understand the process in advance, then maybe that will encourage more people to participate. In terms of rezoning, we're going to talk about the standards of review. There was a case, I don't know, it's Gould versus Holcomb Bridge, I think it's called, up in North Fulton. There was a lawsuit there, and one of the outcomes of that case was what's identified as the Gould criteria. The existing ordinance has those criteria, and the proposed ordinance has those criteria. Both ordinances, the existing and the draft, have additional criteria. You're probably familiar with them, but I'll read just quickly. The existing uses and zoning of the nearby property, the suitability of the property for the zone purpose, the length of time the property has been vacant, the threat to the public health, safety, and morals if rezoned, the extent to which the value of the property is diminished by the present zoning, and 6, the balance between the hardship on the property owner and the benefit to the public in not rezoning. And then, as written, there are 3 more criteria that Mayor and Council could consider. So there are standards of review, just like those, for property rezonings, for text amendments to the ordinance, for special uses, and for changes to the what's called the character area map, which is a future land use map by another name. So those are criteria that are supposed to be considered by planning and zoning, in this case the zoning commission, and also ultimately by the decision makers, which reminds me of one issue that we talked about recently, Deanne and I. As the existing ordinance is written, the special exception can be decided by the Board of Zoning Appeals. But a special exception is a special permit. It can only be approved by the legislative body. So what I'm proposing is that the special exception be converted to a special use, and that special use is processed through Planning Commission, Zoning Commission, and then ultimately Mayor and Council. Because right now, the Board of Zoning Appeals can approve a special exception, which is, it's just a special use. It's like a conditional zoning. It identifies one particular use. The advantage of a special use is that you don't have to open the door to all of the uses that are listed. And we got down to 4 digits going through the alphabet. X, 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 X. So there's a long list of, once you rezone a property, there's a long list of uses that could be established on the property versus a special use where it's only one use being considered. The special use process is just like a property rezoning. Public notice, public hearings before zoning commission, public notice, public hearing before mayor and council. Are there any questions on procedure, standards of review?
Anybody else got anything before we need a motion to come out of the public hearing, correct? Motion to come out of the-
There's no other public
Hearing.
comment. Make a motion to come out of the public hearing.
Second.
All right, any further discussion, hearing that, call for a vote.
Councilmember Greathouse?
Aye.
Councilmember Middlebrooks?
Yes.
Councilmember Tucker?
Yes.
Councilmember Reeves? Yes. Councilmember Heck?
Yes.
Next item is the city attorney's report.
Nothing at this time, Mayor.
City clerk's report.
Nothing at this time, Mayor.
Anything from the city engineer?
Not at this time.
All right, we'll move to the city manager's report.
First item for council's consideration is discussion potential appointments to any vacancies on various city committees or boards. Mayor?
All right, has anybody,
I have somebody contacted me, Kaylee Neighbors with Lily James Boutique. Would like to be nominated tonight, and it's a thriving downtown boutique with a young perspective. We know that she is the daughter of Jeff and Alicia Neighbors. You know Jeff, he played football for the Auburn Tigers. And Alicia, they operated several local businesses, and they're local people serving their local community.
we may have objection because he's Auburn Tigers.
He had me at that.
All right.
And
For what committee? I don't know.
DDA.
How many do we need for the DDA?
I mean, we,
I just have one open position, and I had someone reach out to me as well, and I submitted that request to council last week. I mean, Miss Neighbors, she hasn't spoken to me, hasn't talked to me, expressed no interest to me that she was interested in the position, and I spoke with her last week regarding something else. And I did present council with Miss Elizabeth Huckabee. She approached me last week about the open position. Her and her husband Jared own several businesses in downtown Thomaston. I mean, I think both candidates are wonderful, and I'd be happy to have either one of them on my board. That's definitely council's choice. I'm not gonna deny either one of them.
You know, Elizabeth, you know, I think her resume her introduction was in the papers that you got. Again, she's really well qualified in that her and her husband have purchased several locations downtown, Hometown Printers and Slices Pizzeria, and I just think she had a great interest too, and I think she would be great. She would be great on that committee.
Mayor, as a suggestion, since you
Yeah.
got two viable candidates, you consider one as a voting member and one as an ad hoc. It's up to you if they were willing to serve. So we've done that before.
we have done that. Did you make yours as a motion?
Yes.
Okay. I thought you said that, I couldn't remember. We do have a motion on the table for this one, and so. And you got the whole, put both of them on one as a,
I mean, I have a recommendation as well. You know, I have my subcommittees for the DDA, which are essentially non-voting members, but they serve in capacity for advisory roles, and also just bringing different, fresh ideas to the table. And you know, I would love to have Kaylee potentially serve on one of those boards. Again, I wish I would have known Kaylee's interests. She has my number. I just spoke with her last week. With Ms. Huckabee, she reached out to me, provided her information, you know, and I think she would definitely bring a a fresh set of ideas to the community, and her and her husband have definitely invested heavily in downtown Thomaston.
Would you be willing to make that motion in the sense of, for the committee in which you just spoke
Sure.
of? Would you be okay with appointing her to the committee he just spoke of?
My nomination was for the DDA position.
We got a motion for that. Is there a second for that motion? For Don
Who
nominated?
is it you nominated on?
Kaylee Neighbors, Jeff and Alicia Neighbors' daughter, who runs Lily James Boutique downtown.
I said,
Okay. We have a motion and a second for that one. That's the one that's on the table. We also know there's alternative things, so any discussion?
Yeah, the only thing that I say is that we've ended up in a position like this before. I think we've got two really good candidates, people that are contributing to the downtown and our community. The thing that bothers me a little bit, though, is we had reached out to Elizabeth and discussed that, and so included that in the packet so everybody would be on notice. And I kind of feel like
we had discussed it with Mr. Lee.
I had discussed it with her.
And I emailed that out to
Last week,
council
yeah.
last week and asked for feedback regarding that potential nomination, and received nothing from anyone, as well as no reference to potentially nomination of Caitlin Neighbors either.
Is there any further discussion on the motion that's on the table now? Hearing none, call for a vote.
Councilmember Graham?
Aye.
Councilmember Middlebrooks?
Yes.
Councilmember Tucker?
No, only because we have discussed Ms. Huckabee.
Well, we talked about one being a member and the other one being an ad hoc
Well,
member.
that one isn't his motion.
His motion was to make
A member.
her a member of the DDA. And we can come back, and if that's the vote of the council, we can come back and put her on as the other thing, or if it's voted down and whatever. So,
Yes.
And Councilmember Henry?
And I'm going to vote no, because I feel like I had brought Elizabeth as a...
Yeah, I agree. I feel like this makes me look very unprofessional on my behalf, because I had no knowledge of Ms. Neighbors' a desire to be on this committee, had no communication with her whatsoever, and Ms. Huckabee had reached out to me, provided information. I provided that context to council last week, received no feedback whatsoever, to kind of be, just blasted from the side with this nomination tonight, and approval just then. It's frustrating, the lack of communication, because I did reach out on behalf of Ms. Huckabee last week to all of you asking for feedback regarding this, and received none.
So with that, let's go ahead. You want to say something?
No, I said that, and I do remember he did send this information out.
But the person you just appointed wasn't the person that had requested to be, had reached out.
And I understand that, but I do remember you sending it out.
is there any other?
Don, would you have any objections to Ms. Neighbors being the ad hoc member?
That, go ahead.
Just
Would
bring
you
up-
had any-
You
would you have-
you already voted
Yes.
for that. Now,
Just appointed, but I don't think it was designated whether she was the ad hoc or the
no,
voting member.
It was,
Voting member.
he said DDA on his motion, because
Well, I know, but they would still be on the DDA, but it wasn't in the form of a voting member or an ad hoc member of the DDA.
My motion and my intent was that she was a voting member of the DDA.
Okay.
And again, I have no issue with Ms. Neighbors, and I think she brings a very good presence to the DDA board. It's the process, it's the lack of communication, it's the fact that I've reached out and I presented you with a viable candidate for her to not even receive a vote And it comes back on me
Now,
and making me feel very unprofessional in the way I, told her that there was nothing.
with that said, and I certainly understand your perspective, and I get it. With that said, I'll make a motion to appoint in order. I think Ms. Huckabee would bring a lot of merit to the development down to the DDA. So with that said, I'll make a motion to appoint her on the committee as well, I guess, as the ad hoc member.
Can I ask just a question on it? What is the what sets the number of members on the committee?
The bylaws.
The bylaws that we just voted on last month.
Okay, all right.
Well, maybe, let's go.
Yeah. So there's a motion on the table,
And I'll second
and you'll
that.
second that. Is there any discussion? And you can always add later, if somebody comes off of the DDA, which is,
Excuse me, what Ryan motion?
My motion was to nominate Ms. Elizabeth Huckabee as the ad hoc member to the DDA.
so she's a non-voting, she'll be on the DDA as non-voting on that committee that,
I think the biggest thing is, if we provide council with recommendations in the packet, the people that have actually reached out to us and informed us, hey, we'd like to serve in this capacity, those potential nominations should be addressed first before we hear of any other potential nominations.
the way Robert's Rule of Order, the motion was made for the other person, and
I just don't see the intent of me providing that context and information beforehand for it to not be used at all. That's my frustrations in this vote. And again, I have no issue with Ms. Neighbors. I think she'll serve as a great person on this board. It's just the process of I reached out to Ms. Huckabee, or Ms. Huckabee reached out to me, and then she provided the information. I provided that to council for feedback, asked for recommendations, received none. Come in tonight, she had reached out to me today. Hey, will I be appointed tonight? Yeah, I had nobody else that I know of that wants to be on this board just to come in tonight, and it not go that way. So, again, I'm very big on if I say this is how it's going to be, I want to be a man of my word. I'm really big on integrity and saying if I say something I want to say, I mean it. And so again, my frustrations are voiced and I provided the context and information for it to just completely be disregarded.
motion second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, call for a vote.
Councilmember Greathouse?
All right.
Councilmember Middlebrooks?
Yes.
Councilmember Tucker?
Yes.
Councilmember Reeves?
Yes.
Councilmember Head?
Yes.
And Mayor, while we're on this topic, I agree with what he's saying, and I think that, I don't know if we need to make this a form of a motion, but we need to look to change the bylaws to add an additional member to it. 'Cause I agree that there are two viable candidates here, and in order
I don't
to,
think we need to change the bylaws to make exception. I think we need to keep it as it is.
I just don't know what to say when we have X number of, how many members are on the current committee?
So,
7. I don't know if it's
We're making an
statutory.
exception.
I would think if you added an 8th person, you almost want to add a
Add
9th one because
You're right.
you don't that
That's
odd
I probably
number
should have asked you about how many were on
of
there
people
first.
too, then you could have a.
But can we please establish a procedure of what we need to do so this doesn't happen again?
I just wonder is if we have one of these, if we have a session and when we're going to have, or going to solicit members to be put on a committee, I just wonder if we ought to ahead of time maybe notify Oasis, and Oasis, says, okay, I'm going to personally call the people, and then we won't end up in a situation.
if Miss Neighbors had expressed interest to me, I would have asked her, hey, Miss Neighbors, can you provide a biography of your merit, of why you want to be on the DDA board, in the same context that Miss Huckabee provided that, and that way you would have two viable options to actually choose from. Because in this sense, all you have is, okay, Miss Neighbors, she owns the property, versus Miss Huckabee, she's provided a bio, she's taken time to actually put something together for you guys to give information on herself.
So in the future, are we going to require bios?
Well, that was my understanding that was required. I was under the understanding that was required, for council to know who was being potentially nominated.
I think the county has official, resumes, put in applications, but we never have done that.
They accept applications.
So there may be something we need to think about, how we want to do nominations in the future, because a lot of times we'll sit here for 6 months asking who wants to be on the committee, and we don't ever give anybody.
Well, I think somehow, I think we did what we thought we.
I'm not upset with the situation. I'm just upset with, again, what was the purpose of going and sending information for it to just kind of be disregarded? And the lack of communication.
Are there any other,
Yeah, I would just like to say,
Things.
if we have a position like that, Club, and you have somebody you want, that we ought to notify Oasis, and Oasis can make the call around to make sure everybody's aware, hey, this person's gonna be nominated unless there are any objections.
The statute says 7 directors,
She can't change it.
yeah,
but there are terms,
Yes, there are terms.
so.
We just need to establish procedure and stick with it.
If you guys could just let me know, I like to include any information, even if it's not a bio, even if it's an email nominating someone for a subcommittee, I'll put that in y'all's packets just so everyone's aware as well.
And Oasis, I think a bio is important simply so that some of us, and that's the reason I ask it of Elizabeth, because some people are not as familiar with Elizabeth as others are, and I think that bio sort of says, hey, here's why I think I'm qualified, and here's my background, and so it's to sort of help everybody say, hey, here's who's going to be nominated, and here's who she is, and these are her qualifications.
are there any other ones that were, didn't we have 2 last time that we're thinking about for this guy?
Wow.
On another committee?
Well, yes.
I mean, it was, because I think there was 2 people talking to, and we tabled it last
Yeah,
time.
well, one committee that we thought might be a little bit problematical is there's a position open in the on the city ethics committee. And, that's one that's,
Actually, 2 open, didn't it?
is there 2?
I believe so.
I think it's just Bob Cochran.
Yeah.
There's two openings. You got 2 on there, it says tabled. Jack-
Like Doug said, I talked to Ashton
Yeah.
about this, Ashton Fallon, and she asked to be nominated for this position. Yeah, and Bob's from my district, so this will be just one district. Person replacing another.
Get it cleared up.
Is there 1 or 2? Because I thought, and according to this, there's,
Does anybody in your district want it? This, no, that's the other one. So there's 2 ethics. So there was 2 nominees the other last month. I just bring my other sheet I had. I thought there's 2. There's only 1 for the ethics? Okay. And that's the one in,
Right.
you making a motion?
Right.
For Ashton Fallon to
Right.
serve on that one, okay. I think at last meeting you put her on another committee,
She's on the.
but he had nominated her for another one and somebody else had her.
but she
She's on
wasn't.
the
Yeah.
planning committee.
Right.
There's a conflict of some sort.
Okay.
I'll second the nomination.
So we have a motion and a second,
For Bob Cochran?
no,
Yeah, she's going to
Ashton
replace.
Fallon.
Yeah, Ashton Fallon's going to replace Bob Cochran on that. I think Ashton will be very helpful on there because she's an attorney, has a background, and will help guide them.
so we have a motion and a second, any further discussion? Hearing none, call for a vote.
Councilmember Graham?
Aye.
Councilmember Middlebrooks?
Yes.
Councilmember Tucker?
Yes.
Councilmember Reeves?
Yes.
Councilmember Harris?
Yes.
All right. Any other ones? Not at this time. Here's the next item.
Next item for council's consideration is discussion and potential authorization to acquire a vehicle for the building inspector. You have a quotation with your packet headed I-4 for a 2017 used or F-150 in the amount of $36,872. You will denote the price here is valued less than the one surplus. However, it is not a new vehicle due to the fact that a government-ordered truck from Ford has about an 8-month ETA. The building inspector's current vehicle has been transferred to the police department because it fit the equipment for the animal control officer. So building official is assigned to City Hall. 2 code enforcement officers are assigned to the police department. They serve a dual role as animal control officer, and they already have the equipment, so we have to acquire a new truck for the building official. Staff's recommendation is to authorize the expenditure. This expenditure was not appropriated. However, we have our building inspector currently riding around in a little bitty old car. A lot of the inspections are either on commercial or residential dwellings do require the use of a ladder, which has made things quite problematic. So staff's recommendation is to have a budget amendment in the near future and to authorize the purchase of Thomaston Ford this truck in the amount of $36,872. We did quote one new vehicle and looked at a couple of others on the lot. We did not go out of town to price trucks, found this to be within the market value. That's staff's recommendation.
Is that the cost of the 2017?
You've heard that recommendation. Do I hear a motion?
So ordered.
Second?
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, call for a vote.
Councilmember Graham?
Aye.
Councilmember Middlebrooks?
Yes.
Councilmember Tucker?
Yes.
Councilmember Reeves?
Yes.
Councilmember Head?
Yes.
Next item for council's consideration is discussion of potential authorization for the purchase of transformers for the electric department. You have a copy of the packet in your packet headed I-5. The reason this is coming before City Council is because of the value of the expenditure in the amount of $29,250 for 50 kVA, 37.5 kVA, and 25 kVA transformers for stock. This is part of the joint purchasing agreement through the electric department. Therefore, you'll see only one quote. Staff's recommendation is to authorize the transaction.
You've heard that recommendation. Do I hear a motion?
So ordered.
Second?
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, call for a vote.
Councilmember Graham?
Aye.
Councilmember Middlebrooks?
Yes.
Councilmember Tucker?
Yes.
Councilmember Reeves?
Yes.
Councilmember Head?
Yes.
Next item for council's consideration is discussion and potential authorization for contract for sidewalk repair. You have a copy of the proposal attached with your packet, accompanied by a summary from our Public Works Director who is in attendance. That attachment is headed I-6, and what we are doing, if you remember last year, we did some grinding in conjunction with panel replacement. This is the same company we utilized for the grinding, and it will encompass the remediation of 380 pedestrian sidewalk hazards which have been identified over 8 blocks in the area, and there is a map on page 10, but it borders North 6th Avenue to the south, 4th Avenue to the west, Short East Street, Goodrich East, and to the east, A Street Northeast, and North Bessel. Total cost of the project will be $32,730. We'll pay for out of the 2022 LMIG or the T-SPLOST money, and this will accompany at some point in time a panel replacement project. Is that correct, Kyle?
Yes.
Did I miss anything?
This will be the first project of 2 grinding operations. This will be focused on the east side. The second project for roughly $30,000 will be focused on the west side.
So staff's recommendation is to authorize the execution of the agreement.
And I will add that it does, the last one we did,
That's great.
it looks good.
I mean, it takes some time for the color to
Well, if
kind
you
of
go out
catch
and
up. and
pressure
power
wash
down.
it yourself.
Right.
And can I ask a question too, Kyle? So there are other areas too, such as Green Street and Jackson Avenue, that have some pretty severe things. Well, kind of what's the timeline over how we look at other areas of town too?
Well, the timeline and the amount of money we budget for concrete repair and sidewalk replacement, I couldn't tell you how long it would take. But the strategy right now is to start on our street, which we did in 21. That's the most heavily walked area, being Christmas Lane. And we swapped over to the east side and did Deluxe Circle. And now we're moving to the south and doing 6th to 4th. And then later this year, we're gonna swap back over to the left and do O and N. We get more for our money if the contractor stays in that area, and we're trying to knock that out. Now, if we have issues here and there, we're gonna try to do those internally. We've got,
Just do them as a one-off kind of situation.
Yes,
Yes.
we had an intern maybe 3 years ago come in and do GIS on transitional points. So anything that was a panel replacement, they gave it a mark. Anything that was a greater than a 1-inch transition, I think they gave it a mark. And I did the rough math based on the linear feet, based on prices 3 years ago. If you did total panel replacement, which is not what we're doing, it was like $14 million, I think. So we're chipping away. But with this new program, we do get rid of some hazardous issues where the panels aren't necessarily in bad shape. Because if they're too bad, we do a panel replacement. But it does away with that hazard and gets it into ADA compliance for a lot cheaper.
and this company does their own assessment and is very detailed. And the areas that we're in now are the worst areas for sidewalk. There are some that are spread out, but these are the worst areas that I've seen. Now, we can change our process next year if you guys have any other areas in mind, but now the strategy is just to conquer one block at a time.
I think you've done a good job, and I think, the rationale behind how you choose this and keep them in one area, I think that's smart.
Make a motion that we approve as presented.
I got a motion, do I hear a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, call for a vote.
Councilmember Graham?
Aye.
Councilmember Middlebrooks?
Yes.
Councilmember Tucker?
Yes.
Councilmember Reeves?
Yes.
Councilmember Head?
Yes.
Next item for council's consideration is authorization to execute a grant writing agreement with Allen Smith Consulting. This will be for 2022 CDBG project to finish out the scope that was cut from the last CDBG project where we did some sewer work over on Avenue N, and due to the service connections in the neighborhoods, we had to roll that scope back. So what we would like to do is to apply to go back and finish that scope for the residents that were cut out. This does require formal procurement now. State changed the rules, so we had to do procurement for engineering services and grant writing. Allen Smith was the only participant in the solicitation, and we requested sole source waiver from the Department of Community Affairs, which was granted. Staff's recommendation is to authorize the mayor to execute the agreement headed I-7 in your packet with Allen Smith Consulting, and the fee for the grant writing will be in the amount of $6,000, which is denoted on the first page, and you follow down to the bottom. Fee for project readiness is $4,000. Total fees to be $10,000. All of these expenditures are grant eligible for reimbursement if the project is funded. And I believe we have a 100% success rate with CDBG grants with this consultant.
You've heard that recommendation. Do I hear a motion?
Four.
Second?
I'll second it.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, call for a vote.
Councilmember Graham?
Aye.
Councilmember Middlebrooks?
Yes.
Councilmember Tucker?
Yes.
Councilmember Reeves?
Yes.
Councilmember Head?
Yes. Next item for council's consideration is a discussion and the potential enactment of a resolution regarding the speed limits downtown. Attached with your packet, headed I-8. This is a formal resolution petition to the Georgia Department of Transportation to lower the speed limit in our downtown, and the approximate cross streets or reference streets are denoted in the resolution, but this would move the speed limit from 35 miles an hour to 25 miles an hour within that area. Due to the amount of wrecks that we've witnessed, due to the increased number of pedestrian traffic, and hopefully in placemaking and the creation of a downtown where we want more inhabitants to walk, to visit, lowering the speed hopefully will be safer. I have talked to Tyler Peak out at DOT, advised him of this resolution, and based on future conversations we've had with GDOT, they've already started the process of initiating whatever investigation or study they need to do to make this transition. So this is a formality of something they're already working on, but I hope it reiterates the city's position and need to lower the speed limit. Chief, would you like to add in on that? Anything?
No, I agree with the resolution. He mentioned it to me. And the vehicles are trying to beat those lights, and we've got to do something to. And doing traffic enforcement in that little block area is nearly impossible because of the lights. And really, when you do the speed studies, it's not an issue. The speed comes in when they try to beat the light. So it's a good first step to try to do something in the downtown area.
Make a motion to approve.
Second.
Oh, yeah. Before the motion, only one modification. We'd ask that the mayor's name be stricken from the resolution due to perceived conflict.
I'll amend my motion to include that.
Motion here, second.
Second.
Totally forgot.
Dr. Peg, answer
Be worth at least-
that. Motion is second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, call for a vote.
Councilman Graham?
Aye.
Councilman Middlebrooks?
Yes.
Councilman Tucker?
Yes.
Councilman Reeves?
Yes.
Councilman Rick?
Yes.
Next item for consideration is discussion, approval, and authorization of a rental rate resolution for properties known as community development properties. These are rates for the 43 units. Actually, it's going to be less than 43 because I'm going to explain a little bit why. But this is the $25 per month that we have historically done in the past. Staff's recommendation will be to enact this and to not make it applicable until April 1st, which will give us 30 days notice to advise the tenants. And this will only be applicable to those rents who have been in continued housing with us, that the ones that we have set at previous meetings based on market rate data provided by HUD be left alone. So this will only impact those that we have not previously set due to vacancy and would to go into effect March 1st.
Is it April 1st?
April 1st, sorry.
You've heard that recommendation. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Motion second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, call for a vote.
Councilman Graham?
Aye.
Councilman Middlebrooks?
Yes.
Councilman Tucker?
Yes.
Councilman Reeves?
Yes.
Councilman Rick?
Yes.
Next item for consideration is the authorization for the mayor to execute an engagement letter with driver Adams and Sharp for the commissioning of audit of the city's joint projects. Staff's recommendation is to authorize. Total fees $4,200. And the intent is that this be split between the city and the county for the purposes of auditing our joint projects.
You've heard that recommendation. Do I hear a
Didn't
motion?
they do this last year?
Do it every year.
They're gonna do it every year?
Got a motion to hear second.
I second.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, call for a vote.
Councilman Graham?
Aye.
Councilman Middlebrooks?
Yes.
Councilman Tucker?
Yes.
Councilman Reeves?
Yes.
Councilman Rick?
Yes. Next item for consideration is authorization for the mayor of the city to enter into an intergovernmental agreement with Upson County Board of Commissioners for the provision of IT services. It's one of your handouts contained in Article 2. The price is increased $808 per quarter, which is the equivalent of a 4.75 or roughly their percentage increase, which corresponds with the raise that was given both by the city of Thomaston and the Upson County Board of Commissioners. So staff's recommendation based on that modification is for council to authorize the mayor to execute an intergovernmental agreement.
You've heard that recommendation. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, call for a vote.
Councilmember Greathouse?
Aye.
Councilmember Middlebrooks?
Yes.
Councilmember Tucker?
Yes.
Councilmember Reeves?
Yes.
Councilmember Head?
Yes. That's all I have, Mayor, other than closing. We have closing on our USDA bonds scheduled for tomorrow at 1 o'clock. So that is where USDA will come in and pay off the bank, right? And then we'll go into repayment with USDA on a 40-year note. Is that right?
I think so.
The only other business I have is we are expected to get a certificate of occupancy on our new fire department. Hopefully this week, maybe next week, and I have asked Finance Director, Mr. Joyce, to give you an update of where we are with budgetary funds and change orders. We had to wait the whole time.
Yeah, you made him wait the whole time.
That's all right. Thank you.
Starving to death.
Joe, eat before the meeting?
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So Russell asked me to put together a budget, where we were, what the original budget, how it changed for the fire department. So I attempted to do that, and then I'll put on here some of the expenditures on the second page. We'll get to that. And tried to kind of match up the two. So our original budget, you see that 2,636,110, so 2,636,110 was what was reviewed with you after we added that extra bay, fifth bay, right? I numbered it, but I wanted to make sure. So after we added the fifth bay, that's what it was. So we have, so that's kind of where I wanted to start. You see the breakdown on that, but none of that has changed. So since that time period, we've added all those change orders, $91,424 worth of change orders. So the total project would be $2,727,534. After those were change orders actually through McWright and through 2WR, National Architecture Firm. So then at the bottom, we added the red light, and I didn't have time to meet with Russell, but it looks to me like our expenses are going to be right at $100,000 for that, like 97 something.
So Lonnie, those change orders are booked to contingency, right?
Yeah, I'm getting that. I'm getting to that part. Yeah.
What's a sing cabinet?
Yeah, I knew you were going to be the one to find that. I think that's one of those touchstone things. No, I don't. Either that's what it said on the invoice, or I misspelled it. It was a sing cabinet. But I knew that you were going to be the one to catch that.
I've never heard of one. So.
Yeah.
I thought we were going to have Thursday night karaoke.
Yeah, it's that touchstone thing like that at Waffle House.
Yeah.
Exactly. All right, back to the numbers only on the left side. So we added the safety light there. It was around, like I said, 97,000 is kind of what I have on that. And then we had to pay Georgia Power for pole work, $30,129.
They moved 3 poles for 30 grand.
30 grand?
We could do.
Not legally.
Not on there, right away or whatever.
It was actually contentious.
Yeah, that leaves us about $2,854,938. So for funding for this, we had the original part of the bond that was left over after we paid the fees that come out of it, $2,348,000. We had $250,000 budgeted last year because we knew we had some overages. So we were at about $2,598,000. So that puts us $255,000 over budget, but up in that number at the very top was $117,500 in contingency that was kind of built in. So that leaves us with an overage around $138,443, give or take a few little invoices here or there. And that basically corresponds to the light.
Safety light. We didn't
I mean, the light in the Georgia Power thing. So then I have all of this if somebody wants to see it, but it's 3 or 4 pages. So I've scheduled all the invoices that I could find associated with it, and then I summarized it for you just by vendor. So McWright, we paid about $2.2. You can kind of see, it looks to me like Reedwick LLC, we paid one invoice for half of that light for 36, but we're going to owe another one, I'm assuming, because it said one of 2 on that. And you can see all the way down the line what we paid. So through the end of January, we paid about $2.6 million out. We are going to owe $194 to McWright. That includes the retainage that they hold on those every time they submit a draw, which is normal. Then we would owe that other $36.5 to Reedwick, so we'd be at about $2.8
$2,840,000, and as I showed you on the budget on the front side, we're at $2,854,000. So I'm off about $14,000 on something we haven't spent in furniture, fixtures, and equipment, or, you know, something along there, but that's less than 0.5%. So you see kind of where you are with it. So we're looking at an overage of 138 grand or so than what we thought from initially, so. And we're ready to get in it.
Some kind of schedule for grand opening.
We
have
need
those floppy
to,
days?
so,
Yeah, that's it. Characters.
that's all I got, Mayor, other than a brief executive session.
All right.
I think one
We
thing-
do have a
one
other
thing, yeah.
thing, and I hated I didn't mention it earlier, but you're gonna.
That's all right, another business. I've been approached by a group of individuals that would like to honor the death of Gary Self by maybe getting some signage to put out and maybe name the pickleball courts after him in some way. At this point, we're not asking for money, but just permission from the city in order to do that. It'd be great if the city wanted to pay for it, but I don't think they're asking that at this point. But it's in my district, they approached me, so.
We do hate to hear that.
When did Mr. Self
He died last Friday, while he was being prepped for surgery. So,
That's when you have to.
I'd like to say too that I think that would be a neat way. Those pickleball courts,
for all him.
really, I think Gary started the effort to talk about that, and I was at the county meeting last week when there was the issue that came up over the waiver, and Gary, we have really lost an important member of our community, and you know, we talked earlier about how some people are not comfortable getting up in front of other people and talking. And Gary was that voice when he had something he was interested in. And the thing I always found about Gary is that he could disagree with you, but he was always respectful. He never talked down to people. He got up just as he did last Tuesday, a week ago, in the meeting in talking about the waiver, something he felt passionately about. He gets up, makes that presentation. He was always well informed, and he always made a good argument. So in a community where it's so often there are only a few people who are willing to get up in a group of people and be that voice, I think we've lost a voice, and we've lost an important voice of somebody who, man, they just made sure they were well informed, and when they had something they wanted to speak up about, you could make sure Gary was going to speak up about it. And I'm glad that at the end of that meeting, the county did, they voted to change that ordinance so that it allows the people who are not organized gatherings out at the Civic Center, they wouldn't have to sign that waiver. But I think it's just really appropriate to recognize him. And I think that would be a great way to do it, and something that he was passionate about. And it honors that voice that he was in the community, and both to the city when he lived in the city, and then when he went to the county, into the county too. So I appreciate what he did, and that'd be a neat way to do it.
And I think I hadn't had anything prepared to put it in y'all's packet, so I wanted to put it out there if we could talk about it and have a decision one way or another by the next meeting, so I could get back to this group. But I'm with Doug. I can't think of a better way in order to honor him by doing this, because he loved playing, and I think those courts, those core pickleball courts, are only there because of his voice. So, but
And that what I wanted to do, I wanted to make a seat tonight, and I got busy and forgot. I wanted to sit off one just special for him, because I mean that's usually the only person we had come to meetings, you know. And then, like I said, he would always, you know, like Doug said, respect. I mean, he could sit there and think the total opposite from what you would, but you with no ugly words and crosswords. It was the whole community is gonna really miss Mr. Gary.
I'll include that on the next meeting agenda. And I will say, the short time I've been here, we had many long conversations, and he was always very welcoming. So,
Well, like I said, I don't think the funding is gonna be an issue, but obviously it's the city's property in court, but I'd really like for this to happen. Thank you.
I've only played pickleball one time. It was with Gary. We
Yeah.
won. So I'm gonna probably play again. I made it one and done there. So
Brief executive.
we have a brief executive,
to discuss.
whatever it's called, executive session.
Personnel.
Personnel. Wait.
I make a motion we go into executive session for the purpose of personnel.
Do I have a second? Second. Call for a vote.
Councilmember Graham?
Aye.
Councilmember Middlebrooks?
Yes.
Councilmember Tucker?
Yes.
Councilmember Reeves?
Yes.
Councilmember
Yes.
Hey, I did my part in like 30 minutes.
I got your turn on.
Like real force next meeting, like real force next week, you like four studies? Yeah. Okay, that's my favorite thing.
Thank you all.
See you later.
Hey, Jay, will you sign my sign-in sheet for me?
Jane, knowing that
Thank you.
there is a vision issue, you didn't tell me that.
Yeah, I'm
Loaded
not
me
gonna
up
change.
in the golf cart to begin with, so going forward, I'm driving.
You know, just that.
You have to do it.
All right, we're back in regular session. We need to go back into executive session, but we need to go in for personnel and
Potential litigation
real estate, maybe.
and real estate.
All right, so I need a motion to go into executive session for those reasons.
I make a motion, we go into executive session for personnel, real estate, and potential litigation.
Second.
All right. All right. No discussion. Call for a vote.
Councilmember Graham?
Aye.
Councilmember Middlebrooks?
Yes.
Councilmember Tucker?
Yes.
Councilmember Reeves?
Yes.
Councilmember Head?
Yes.
We're back on.
All right, we're back in regular session now. Motion here.
Staff's recommendation is to authorize the mayor to execute agreement between the city of Thomaston and the district attorney's office for the prosecution of municipal court cases.
All right, you've heard that recommendation. Do I hear a motion?
So order.
With the changes that we discussed.
With the changes as to be drafted by the city attorney.
All right, a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, call for a vote.
Councilmember Graham?
Aye.
Councilmember Middlebrooks?
Yes.
Councilmember Tucker?
Yes.
Councilmember Reeves?
Yes.
Councilmember Hatt?
Yes.
All right. Having nothing else, I hear a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Go ahead.
Have a good night.
Go home.
I got one for y'all, but I asked for. What?